Tsar bomb, right? Nuclear bomb from the Soviet Union. Atomic bomb. So let's see what Heidegger has to say about technology and the atomic power. Because when we saw, for example, what was did against Hiroshima and Nagasaki, against the Japanese people, it was a complete horror, right? So some arguments are defended in the meaning that the atomic bombs that were dropped in these cities helps to end earlier the conflict of the Second War as any option, but they prefer drop the bombs and show the power and kill at once two cities, right? So with this kind of power, of destruction and technology and power, Bacon, Francis Bacon, that is the same. So the atomic technology for guns, for bombs, was the breaking point in the mankind concerning the possibility of the species commit suicide, right? So here we start to think what is important in the issue of existence and against the determinism of Thanatos and Eros that Freud showed to us. We have other things. We have things like the existence came before the essence, right? So it's the beginning of the existentialism, right? So let's try to see other video that is concerning an interview with Heidegger, and we can see in this interview the beginning of the design, the existence as preceding the essence. So before we exist and after we have the essence. And this will be a key issue concerning technology and the connection among technology and philosophy. Let's see what Heidegger will say.
Setzt ja gerade in der Interpretation des Daseins voraus. Das heißt, des Wesens des Menschen. Und der Grundgedanke meines Denkens ist ja gerade der, dass das Sein bzw. die Offenbarkeit des Seins den Menschen braucht und dass umgekehrt der Mensch nur Mensch ist, insofern er in der Offenbarkeit des Seins steht. Damit ist die Frage, wie weit nicht nur mit dem Sein beschäftigt bin und die Menschen vergessen Mensch. Ich kann nicht in seinem Fall nur ein Abwesen des Menschen sein.
Und was meinen Sie, wenn Sie zweitens davon sprechen, dass größer als die Gefahr der Atombombe für die heutige Menschheit das Gesetz der Technik ist? Das Gestell, wie Sie den Grundzug der Technik nennen, das Wirkliche in der Weise
The law of technology is always instrumental, right?
Bergen oder anders ausgedrückt, alles und jedes auf einen Knopfdruck hin abrufbar zu machen.
Ja, zunächst ist zu sagen, dass ich nicht bin. Ich habe nie gegen die Technik gesprochen, auch nicht über das sogenannte Dämonische der Technik, sondern ich versuche das Wesen der Technik zu verstehen. Und wenn Sie diesen Gedanken zitieren, mit der Gefährlichkeit der Atombombe und einer noch größeren Gefährlichkeit der Technik, so denke ich an das, was sich heute als Biophysik entwickelt, dass wir in absehbarer Zeit imstande sind, den Menschen so zu machen, sein organisches Wesen so zu konstruieren, wie man ihn braucht. Geschickte und ungeschickte, gescheite und dumme. So weit wird es kommen. Die technischen Möglichkeiten sind heute bereit und wurden bereits schon mit dem Nobelpreisträger in einer Tagung in London ausgesprochen. In einem Vortrag vor Jahren in Western schon zitiert. Aber vor allem das Missverständnis ist abzugehen, dass er sich gegen die Technik. Ganz im Gegenteil, ich sehe in der Technik in ihrem Wesen, dass der Mensch unter einer Macht steht, die ihn herausfordert. Und der gegenüber er nicht nur weiß, dass sich hier etwas anfindet, nämlich im Bezug des Seins zum Menschen. Und dass dieser Bezug, der sich im Wesen der Technik verbirgt, eines Tages vielleicht in seiner Unverbrüchung.
So pay attention, because now with this kind of technologies, be the atomic technology for nuclear bombs, be the genetic engineering to modify humans and produce mutants, doesn't matter. The question, the focus of the main question now is, what is the bane? The bane came before the essence. What is the bane, right? Because the cards will say cogito ergo sum, and will focus on the cogito, but not in the sum. And the sum precedes the essence, right? So what is the being? What is the human being, right? What is the human being? If we are talking about the being, we are talking about the human being. And what makes us different of other kinds of life and the technology, and different from the technology? So we are in the contemporary philosophy, right? And the issue here is that we need to understand what and who is the human being, right? Because we came from a history that the essence, the reality in the beginning of the ancient philosophy is in the formal world, the ideal world, idealistic world. And after, in the beginning of the modernity, with Descartes, the focus will be in the subject, but in the subject that is thinking, right? So in the thinking process that after will be developed in the philosophies of Kant, Hegel, and the issue of the will with Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Freud with the determinism of the unconscious ideas guiding our consciousness and our acts. And here we are in a world with a technology that is able to, the mankind can commit suicide with this technology, that is the atomic bombs, right? So here we start to see the power of technology and how this power can become our master, right? So from the creator, we can become the creature of these machines. Let's see what Heidegger
Ein
will
Mensch von
say.
Wesen nach immer zu neuen Versuchen genötigt ist. Und gerade in der jetzigen Zeit würde ich meinen, indem ich auf die erste Frage zurückgehe, dass die Besinnung darauf, was und wer der Mensch sei, nötig ist, heute, wo die Gefahr besteht, dass der Mensch ganz der Technik ausgeliefert wird und eines Tages zu einer gesteuerten Maschine gemacht. Sie haben noch eine andere Bemerkung, wo Sie auf Ihr eigenes Land Bezug nehmen und sagen, dass Ihr Land und Ihr Volk zu den unterentwickelten Völkern gehören. Wenn man von unterentwickelt spricht, muss man immer fragen, welches Ziel ist gedacht für die Entwicklung? Nach der heutigen Auffassung der europäischen und amerikanischen bedeutet Entwicklung, das heißt zunächst zu einer modernen technischen Welt. Von diesem Gesichtspunkt aus würde ich sagen, dass Ihr Land aufgrund seiner alten und ständigen Überlieferung hochentwickelt ist, demgegenüber die Amerikaner mit ihrer Technik und ihren Atombomben.
So the use of atomic bomb, if we think about the instincts in the Freudian theory and we remember the instinct of death at the side of the instinct of life, and if we think in these instincts in a collective level, right? So we will ask human beings with this kind of power, the atomic bomb, what will be the behavior of the human beings after this kind of power is disclosure for the human species, right? So is it possible that we are not condemned to these instincts? Maybe this kind of existentialism, where the existence came before the essence, is what after Sartre will say that we are condemned to the liberty, to the freedom. So we need an answer for this dark perspective that Freud came to bring to us, and maybe this path to get out of this dark scenario is in the existentialism, right? So I don't care where I came from. I'm here now. I'm existing now. And the action is what will guide the notion of the subject. We are free in essence because we simply exist here. Doesn't matter why. We are here. And what we can do now is the action. So, liberty, freedom, is it possible when we think about the Freudian theory? We have liberty, or there is a determinism, and the end of our species is not so far, considering the technology, right? One important question: when self-driving cars and human surgeons commit less errors than humans driving a vehicle or operating another human being, well, the robot will be the road, right? So, it's very possible that we already are controlled by the machines. So we need to start to think more, what is the being? What differs us from another kinds of life and from the machines? Is the consciousness of the being? What is the human being in a world that technology, the biotechnology, the technology of the artificial intelligence, what are the human being? What is the being? Design. So there's a priority of existence over essence. Design. Should be existence. So what Heidegger will do is say, look, when Descartes talk about the cogito ergo sum, Descartes do not think deep in the subject concerning that the existence precedes the essence. So let's think on the being concerning what we can say about the subject, the soul, the consciousness, the spirit, and the person. So all these words, with all these words we have determination, right? But design is out of determination. Design is always an openness. And what Heidegger will do is use the phenomenology, right, as a method to understand what is the being, what is the existence. And the existence, the being, will be the object of the main object of philosophy. So we are talking about an ontology, right, that use phenomenology as a method. And Heidegger will use Scheler and Rousseau, but he will, of course, develop the thoughts of these philosophers. So, when we are talking about a physical world and a world that is further than physics, there is a problem because metaphysics usually considers as self-evident the issue of the being, but the being is more than self-evident. Phenomenology is a method that will try to discover the meaning that are not in a first perspective for the subject that are looking for this object of phenomenology, this phenomenon, right? So when we are talking about this, we can say that Heidegger will considers the openness of the being because the acts are different concerned in relation to the physics world, right? As well as the psychological world. Acts are different of these. When we take the acts as a phenomenon to be analyzed, right, we see that the acts are always intentional acts, right? Intentional acts. So here we have a division, right? And these intentional acts are not psychological acts. When we say intentional acts, this is not more an object, because the intentionality is always an openness, right? And what more we can say? That the persons are performers of intentional acts. And this is the unit. But let's think more. Let's think about further than psychology, right? Let's think in anthropology. Let's think about also biology, because the being is not only life, and this is the difference of Dasein that is related with the human life, right? And Dasein is not something life plus something, because there's always an openness of the subject, right? So the existence is previews the essence. What more we can say about this philosopher called Heidegger and his masterpiece, Being and Time? I selected here some tests. Heidegger will say, life in its own right is a kind of being, but essentially it's accessible only in Dasein. Dasein is never to be defined ontologically. So Dasein is more than this, right? Because this is collect, describe, and this is not design. Design is related with the being in the world, acting and without limits, right? So let's try to understand uh, the history of Western philosophy concerning two sides that we always can find in the history of the philosophy. So, if we think in the authors, in the philosophers that we already studied here in this introduction to the Western philosophical way, we will remember that in this side we have the physis, a material world, right? And at this other side we have the idea, the formal world. And here we are talking about Plato, right? And the being, Plato, will have more degrees of being and totally the idealistic degree of a full being here in this ideal world, this formal world, and less degree of being in this material, in this physical world. Of course, in the ancient philosophy, Aristotle will contest this and say, no, look, the material world also have a high degree of being, and the being has many causes here. But what I want to bring is that this division here, right, this tension here. And when we go to modernity, we can think in the issue of liberty, right? And the necessity. So, the material world in the modernity, we have the necessity, the causality, right? The classic physics, and this side the liberty. The liberty of the sovereignty, that there's no one ruling. The sovereign is the one that rules itself, right? So we have here Leviathan, right, as a being created by the human being, and that in its essence has liberty. We will come back in this issue further to talk about the being of the artificial intelligence. When we go further, we have here the theoretical reason, and the practical reason. And here, at this side, we have the possibility of universal ethics. So we are talking in how it works with the liberty. We are talking of Kant. And this theoretical reason to know this material world, the nature, right? To know the nature. And here we arrive in the Heidegger's philosophy. And we have the absurdity of the life with the existentialism of Sartre, for example. we have the entity, right? And here we have the being, the design. And the openness, right? So here we have Heidegger. Here we have at this side, right? The idea, the formal, the liberty, the practical reason, the design. And at this side, the entity, the nature, causality, physics, material world. So at the sides we have an opposition to this side, right? That happened in all the history of the philosophy. And here we can see the dialectics in these movements. The existentialism will be concerned with the issue of the being in the absurdity that is the life, right? Because there's no meaning. And when you don't have meaning, it's open. The possibilities are not in a closed sphere. There's an openness, right? So let's see what Madame de Bovary, Simone de Bovary, said about what is existentialism.
Vous demandez la définition de l'homme dans l'optique de l'existentialisme, ce serait vous demander, je crois, de résumer beaucoup de grands livres philosophiques.
Oui, je crois que c'est
très
à
difficile.
peu près impossible.
Mais il y a peut-être moyen, je crois, de vaincre la difficulté en abordant le problème de l'existence de l'homme par différents aspects d'ordre moins général, comme par exemple, quelles sont les valeurs que vous reconnaissez à l'homme?
L'homme lui-même. Nous pensons, et ça c'est un des points les plus importants de l'existentialisme, que l'homme est finalement la raison d'être de l'homme, son avenir et la fin même de toutes ses activités. C'est-à-dire que nous trouvons bien tout ce qui sert aux intérêts, au bonheur et au développement de l'homme, et mauvais tout ce qui va contre. Et c'est là la base absolument fondamentale de ce qu'on peut appeler notre éthique, enfin même notre morale.
Et alors il est à la fois sa cause et sa fin.
Peut-être pas sa cause, mais certainement sa fin. Mettons sa raison d'être.
Alors sa cause, quelle
Sa
serait-elle?
cause, ça c'est une question métaphysique que je ne suis pas apte ici à résoudre. L'homme est là, et nous ne posons pas les questions métaphysiques, pas plus que bien les philosophes depuis Kant.
So how we can see the future is the area of existentialism, right? In opposition to the Freudian world that is related with the determinism and the past, right? So pay attention. Cause and effect, cause and aim, purpose, right? The future. So the perspective of the existentialism is the future. Doesn't matter why I become a writer, so many causes can be the reason. Just accept the fact that you exist, you are a being, and the future is an openness. A very interesting point in the Simone de Beauvoir in this interview is concerning the process to discover the phenomenon, right? The phenomenology works with degrees of enlightenment of the phenomenon, right? So let's see what Madame Beauvoir said about God.
Une fois pour toutes, décision.
Là non plus, ce n'est pas tout à fait exact. C'est pas une crise, c'est plutôt une espèce de prise de conscience. Je me suis aperçu un beau jour, à 14 ans, à 13 ans, je ne saurais pas dire la date exacte, je me suis aperçu un beau jour que je ne croyais pas, que c'était fini. J'avais cru d'une manière très très ardente quand j'étais toute petite. Je croyais aux anges, au petit Jésus, etc. Puis après, j'ai moins cru tout de même à toute cette mythologie plus extérieure, mais enfin, j'ai cru vraiment à Dieu. Mais petit à petit, j'ai épuré Dieu tellement qu'il n'y avait plus aucun rapport avec ce monde, parce que Dieu ne pouvait pas être bête comme toutes les personnes pieuses que je voyais, ou comme les prêtres à qui je parlais. Il était différent, il ne pouvait pas non plus s'intéresser à des bêtises. Il a fini par ne plus répondre à rien ni à personne. Et à ce moment-là, je me suis aperçu que bon, il n'existait plus pour moi finalement. Il s'était évaporé.
Et est-ce que, comme vous dites, c'était évaporé, mais est-ce que vous avez remis le problème en question plus tard?
Plus tard, j'ai fait de la philosophie et tout ce que j'ai appris m'a, je ne pourrais même pas dire confirmé, mais tout ce que j'ai appris continue à être dans la ligne que la question en somme toute, ne se posait pas. Si vous voulez, par exemple, j'ai lu Kant quand j'avais 18 ans et j'ai tout de suite pensé avec Kant qu'il fallait en effet refuser la métaphysique proprement dite ou l'ontologie et se poser le problème à partir du fait que nous existons sur Terre sans chercher à percer par-delà la chaîne des causes et des effets.
Mais si je comprends bien, votre athéisme est d'abord...
So this is existentialism, right? Because when she think about God, she starts to discover that this object, God, is not like was told to her. It's not like she usually had believed in the childhood, right? So in the process of enlightenment concerning the notion of God, this God simple evaporates, right? This is phenomenology, and also is existentialism, the action, right? So we are here, doesn't matter the cause, the metaphysical cause, the essence, the first essence, doesn't matter. We are here and we can act. So the issue is the being. What can be the actions in existentialism? For sure, the future is an openness, in the opposition of the past, right? Is the existentialism the alternative to the psychoanalysis? we choose, what path we choose. Can we choose something, or we are condemned to the past? Or maybe you are condemned to the liberty, right? What I do with someone did to me. So the future is the place of the choice. It's the liberty. You choose your way, your path, according what? Your best or the complete emptiness. Design. We are condemned. Look, the garden of the cemetery is open. Let's stop here. It's a good place to think on philosophy. Let's do a fast video. Very fast video. So how it's possible that your minds the causa marks of someone? This is very strange because can be so many causes, right? So many causes you can have: the heart disease, the behavior, an accident. What is the causal marks of the person? So the life is absurdity. This is what life is, right? Let's get out to the life. We are free to choose. Considering the absurdity of the life, you are free to choose. And this makes us liable with responsibility for our choices that are free choices. So is in the future, lies in the future, the responsibility, and not more in the past. So let's remember that what Sartre and Heidegger are trying to do is, let's analyze what came before the essence, that is the being, the existence, right? So while Heidegger will associate the being and the time, the future, the openness, the indeterminate. So Sartre will relate the being with the nothing. The nothing. So this will change everything, because will change the importance of the relation of cause and effect, right? Because when Sartre tried to start to develop his thinking, saying that the being and the nothing. So it's the same that Sartre say, look, what came before any kind of determination? Of course, the undetermination. And what is not determined? The nothing, right? So the being itself, we have the being itself, right? The being in itself, and we have the being for self. So this is something like Hegel dialectics, because this opposition, and here we have the nothing, right? Undetermined, what came before the being, and here we have the being. And in a dialect process, we will have the nothing with the being, right? And this is a pre-ontology. The ontology will study essence, and what existentialists will do is study the being, right? And the being is the nothings, the undetermined. And this will have a lot of consequence when we think about psychology, because Sartre will start to draft the possibility of psychoanalysis that is existential, right? The existential psychoanalysis. And what is the big difference? Well, Sartre will say we have the psychology that are related with the empirism, right? And here we have Freud. And we have the psychology that is existentialist. And here we have Sartre. Of course, we have a lot of points of connection. A lot of points of connection before the big difference among these two sides, right? Between the empirism psychology and the existentialist psychology. So, what Sartre will say is that in this side, what matters is the desire, right? The instinct, the will. And this will be the content of the consciousness, right? Will determine the consciousness, and this will is unconsciousness, right? In Freud, here is Freud. And another thing is that this kind of psychology will works with a method that try to find tendency, right? Tendency, as well as wants to find the desires, the origin of the desires. So we are extremely related with the past here in this side. And what we'll start will build here is say, look, we have this pre-ontological conception of the human being, and the human being is so complex that when we try to reduce the contingents to abstract and universal structures, we have a problem, because the idea of substance, of person, for this kind of thinking is like something that is not so strong. It's like a cartoon of the human complexity, right? So what we see is that there is absurdity. We never can find the origin of the behavior, the cause, right? The correct structure and sequence of cause. We never can find this. The life is an absurdity, and everything is generic when we use this kind of method and not concrete, right? So start to work with the intuition and the idea that the intuition of the self and any kind of little behavior of each contingence would show the totality of the human being, right? So we start to see that every desire is of an absurd contingence when we start to compare these two sides, right? What more we can say is that the original project of the human being is in the nothing, right, area. So it's always an open possibility and not something determined by the past. So while in Freud we can say that unconsciousness causes the consciousness, the self, right, determines, we can say that the nothing is the cause of the being. And this will change everything, because the human being, the man, is like the being. That is the same of a being of possibilities. That is like, if you pay attention, a project of being. And what is this project of being? This project of being is the same thing of what the instinct is for Freud. It's the origin. But this origin, it's an origin that do not has a determination. And because of this, what the nothing is liberty. Because liberty do not have any determination, so liberty and nothing is the same thing, right? That is the same thing of being. You are condemned to the liberty. The being, that is the nothing, is the fundamental point of the causality. So, inside the being, the causality starts here. And there is no determination, so there is liberty. There is a choice of the all possibilities. This will change everything concerning Freud. So concerning what is similar, we can say that both think that every human has a history, right? And everyone starts with this history like a virgin paper, right? So we can say that there's no primordial data. Even here in Freud, because when the child is in the development process, she is an empty paper, right? And here we have the nothing is equal the being. What more we can say is that both works with symbols, right? So if you have attention here, instinct that is in the unconscious mind, right? And to achieve the conscious mind, the symbols are changing the meaning, right? And here we also always can change the meaning of the symbols, because we have the openness, right? The cause, the first cause is the nothing, is the undetermined, is the liberty. So what we can say also is that what matters is the meaning more than collection and statistics of data, right? So the meaning for Freud and for Sartre is something that is very important. So the existential psychoanalysis is a method to decipherate, right, and not do a catalog, right? So it's to decipherate in each contingence, right? And not only in the past, but also in each action of the patient. So it's a method to decipher, right? And the start point is the experience, but the most important point is the pre-ontological conception of the human being. What more we can say is that the subject that will be the analyzed person is not in a good position in relation with its all position in the analysis, right? To proceed with the investigations. But what more we can say concerning similarities? I don't know. But when we start to pay attention on the difference, the fundamental difference is that here we have the complex, right, as the sum of instincts, energy from the unconsciousness, right? And here we have the choice as something that is always possible, because here the orange is the nothing, there is no determination, so the synthesis is before the consciousness. Other thing that is important is that Sartre do not accept the unconscious structure, because he will say that it's different. You have consciousness and you have knowledge, right? So you can have consciousness, but you cannot have the knowledge. And this is not necessarily an area that is a unconscious mind. There is no unconsciousness. Everything is consciousness, but some things you don't know, right? So what is the most important thing? The start point. Because in another lecture I did a brief history concerning divisions in the history of philosophy, where we have the tension among, to use the expression of modernity, necessity and liberty, or in the ancient philosophy, the physis, right, and the ideal world. Or to talk in Kant, we have here the practical reason and a theoretic reason. And here, in the contemporary world, we have the being. The being as the nothing, right? As the nothing. So, the liberty is at this side, in the Sartre theory, philosophy, and at this other side, you will have the absurdity of the world, of the causation, that you don't know how to explain, right? It's always a cartoon of the reality, the concrete reality. We are condemned to the liberty. Now let's see an existentialist talking about the all past. Is the World War I? Then is that I think it's was a country that time, the beginning of the past century. Perhaps.
La classe était une classe assez violente aussi. Ça venait à la fois de ce que l'atmosphère du port de La Rochelle même entraîne les enfants, peuvent fréquenter les matelots, les marins, etc. À plus de force, plus de violence que l'ordinaire. J'ai retrouvé un peu la même chose au Havre plus tard, là j'étais professeur. Et puis, de ce que j'ai la guerre. Or, la guerre, je l'avais vécue douillettement chez mon grand-père, et là, je tenais la connaissance de ces gosses qui avaient à ce moment-là 13 à 15 ans, étaient vraiment tous conditionnés par ce. Non pas qu'ils poussent être soldats, mais au contraire, ils avaient intériorisé la violence extérieure, et c'est en tant que petite frappe, petit voyou, c'était comme ça. Mais certainement, ça venait de là. Alors, si vous imaginez ce que peut être un petit Parisien de 12 ans, de 11 ans, plein d'interdits, ayant vécu une vie douillette pendant 11 ans, ayant appris à parler un peu plus élégamment, c'est-à-dire bêtement, que les autres, ça peut être là. Le résultat est fâcheux. Surtout que d'ailleurs, au début, croyant me faire bien voir, ils parlaient tous d'une femme qu'ils auraient tuée, ou jeune fille qu'ils auraient tuée, et avec qui ils pétaient les pires orgies. Alors, j'ai cru devoir m'en inventer une. Et j'ai dit au lycée à des camarades qu'effectivement, à Paris, il y avait une fille, qui avait 11 ans, avec qui j'allais à l'hôtel. Et c'est ça qui pouvait paraître surprenant, c'est-à-dire que je la rejoignais l'après-midi, puis nous cherchions un hôtel, nous disions, et nous faisions ce que eux prétendaient faire avec leur fille. Et j'ai même fait écrire par une jeune femme qui était la chose bonne chez ma mère, une lettre. Ah ben c'est à moi. Il y avait mon cher Jean-Paul, je sais pas quoi, qui a été lu par quelques-uns, mais j'ai dit en même temps, parce que ceux de mes camarades qui étaient plus proches que moi avaient évidemment dîné la supercherie. Alors j'ai avoué. 2 ou 3, ça a fait le tour de la classe, et à partir de ce moment-là, je suis devenu vraiment le Parisien. C'est-à-dire qui invente des mensonges, qui a des manières de parler ridicules, et même des sentiments ridicules. J'ai été assez solitaire à ce moment-là. Je me vois encore tournant dans le mail, ça s'appelait. C'était une sorte de jardin, et en même temps ça donnait sur la plage. Autour de celui de mes camarades, qui était du lycée, et même de ma classe, attendant qu'on vient m'appeler pour entrer dans ce groupe. Il m'appelait à la fin, mais enfin, je pense qu'il faisait plaisir de ne pas appeler tout de suite. Donc, ça, c'est une chose certaine. J'ai appris la solitude et en même temps la violence. Et cette violence, qui a été sur moi, enfin, pour mes camarades me taper, puis je rendais. Cette violence, je l'ai intériorisée, c'est-à-dire que j'ai essayé de me sentir violent moi-même. J'ai intériorisé sur bien des points. Et par exemple, mes meilleurs camarades aimaient les gâteaux. Et j'ai commencé à voler dans le sac de ma mère pour avoir de l'argent pour leur offrir. Le but de ce vol était évidemment de plaire à 2 ou 3 des camarades que je trouvais mieux que les autres. C'est en 3e que ça.
So the ugly French boy changed the history of philosophy, observing the contingents, right? What he is talking is contingents of the life. This is important for the psychoanalysis existentialists. Yes, everything is important, not only what Freudian perspective will call unconsciousness, but every little act is important, because the complex in the Freudian theory for Sartre is the last act, free act that a person choose, and the person can choose anything from the first cause, that is the nothing, that is the all existence, right? So every little piece can help, but not in the meaning that you collect memories, but in the meaning that in each event there is the totality of the being. So when Sartre say about his childhood, an event of his childhood, it's a contingence, and in this contingence you can decipher the totality of his being. And the being of Sartre is free to choose a different way from the way that he is talking about. That is the way that happens in his childhood, right? That he was a liar trying to impress other persons. So he simply changed, because the last act is the freedom. And let's see the contingence of why Sartre likes to write. This is a question that is common, it's usual to do for philosophers. Why you write and read so much? And we can understand that the interpretation of the person, that is the being, is the most concrete, the intuition, the last action. So the subject, when relates something, some contingence, the interpretation of the subject is the most concrete. Let's see why Sartre writes.
Assimilé, classé, étiqueté, pensé, redoutable encore. Et j'ai confondu le désordre de mes expériences livresques avec le cours hasardeux des événements réels. De là vint cet idéalisme dont j'ai mis 30 ans à me défaire.
Lecture a joué un rôle très important pour moi. Dès mon enfance, mon refuge était là, les mots. Et alors, à ce moment-là, il faut se lire des livres. Oui, ma vie au lycée de La Rochelle a constitué, d'une part, la violence et l'isolement, et d'autre part, certains jours, le jeudi, par exemple, le dimanche, alors, une journée entièrement consacrée aux livres. Par exemple, la fonction littéraire, il faut que je lise. Bon, alors, il est évident qu'à ce moment-là, ça a présenté quelque chose comme le centre du réel. Le reste apparaissait un petit peu comme des phénomènes, des fantasmes, mettons. Je ne donnais pas une très grande réalité.
Since I wasn't happy in the real world, it's my refuge, the writing and the reading, the words, and the real world become the fantasy. So, it's interesting. If we start to think what others philosophers said about this, I can remember, for example, Cioran, that is another contemporary philosopher. that say the same thing. I write in a meaning of a health process. I need to write to be healthy. And Cyril is very pessimist, right? Why we need to move if all will end? If we think about Hannah Arendt, she will say, I write to not forget, and this is part of the construction of my thoughts. Or Nietzsche will say, I have a necessity to write. That simple happens came out of me. It's my way to be in the world.